Vietnam gained formal independence in 1945 before India, but it took another 3 decades of fighting before the Republic of Vietnam was formed. This chapter on Indochine will introduce you to one of the important states of the peninsula, namely Vietnam. Nationalism in Indochine developed in a colonial context, the knitting together of a modern Vietnamese nation that brought the different communities together was in part the result of colonization, but as importantly, it was shaped by the struggle against colonial domination. If you see the historical experience of Indochine in relation to that of India, you will discover important differences in the way colonial empires functioned and the anti-imperial movement developed. By looking at such differences and similarities, you can understand the varieties of ways in which nationalism has developed and shaped the contemporary world. इंडो चाइना 3 देशों से मिलकर बना है। ये 3 देश हैं वियतनाम, लाओस और कंबोडिया। इस पूरे इलाके के शुरुआती इतिहास को देखने पर पता चलता है कि पहले यहाँ बहुत सारे समाज रहते थे और पूरे इलाके पर शक्तिशाली चीनी साम्राज्य का वर्चस्व था, जिसे आज उत्तरी और मध्य वियतनाम कहा जाता है। जब वहाँ एक स्वतंत्र देश की स्थापना कर ली गई, तो भी वहाँ के शासकों ने न केवल चीनी शासन व्यवस्था को बल्कि चीनी संस्कृति को भी अपनाए रखा। वियतनाम उस रास्ते से भी जुड़ा रहा है जिसे समुद्री सिल्क रूट कहा जाता था। इस रास्ते से वस्तुओं, लोगों और विचारों की खूब आवाजाही चलती थी। व्यापार के अन्य रास्तों के माध्यम से वियतनाम उन दूरवर्ती इलाकों से भी जुड़ा रहता था जहाँ गैर वियतनामी समुदाय जैसे खमेर और कंबोडियाई समुदाय रहते थे। Indochine comprises the modern countries of Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia. Its early history shows many different groups of people living in this area under the shadow of the powerful empire of Qin. Even when an independent country was established in what is now northern and central Vietnam, its rulers continued to maintain the Chinese system of government as well as Chinese culture. Vietnam was also linked to what has been called the Maritime Silk Route that brought in goods, people and ideas. Other networks of trade connected it to the hinterlands were non-Vietnamese people such as the Khmer Cambodians lived. न्यूयेन राजवंश के खिलाफ चढ़ाई का नेतृत्व करने वाले फ्रांसीसी अफसर फ्रांसिस गार्निये की दरबारी सिपाहियों के हाथों हत्या का दृश्य। गार्निये उस फ्रांसीसी दल का सदस्य था जिसने मेकोंग नदी की खोज की थी। 1873 में फ्रांसीसियों ने गार्निये को उत्तर में स्थित टोंकिन प्रांत में फ्रांसीसी उपनिवेश स्थापित करने का जिम्मा सौंपा था। उसने टोंकिन की राजधानी हनोई पर हमला तो किया, लेकिन इस युद्ध में वह खुद मारा गया था। मशहूर नेत्रहीन शायर न्यूयेन दिन च्यू 1822 से 88 ने अपने देश की दुर्दशा पर शोक व्यक्त करते हुए लिखा, मैं चिर अंधकार में जीने को तैयार हूँ। गद्दारों का मुंह देखना मुझे मंजूर नहीं। मुझे कोई आदम जात ना दिखे, कोई बात नहीं। किसी इंसान की पीड़ा मुझे मंजूर नहीं। मैं कुछ ना देखूं, कोई बात नहीं। वतन को छिन्न भिन्न होते नहीं देख सकता। फाइफो बंदरगाह। इस बंदरगाह की स्थापना पुर्तगाली व्यापारियों ने की थी। यह उन बंदरगाहों में से था जिनका यूरोपीय व्यापारिक कंपनियां 19वीं सदी से भी काफ़ी पहले ही इस्तेमाल करने लगी थीं। औपनिवेशिक वर्चस्व और उसका प्रतिरोध। वियतनाम पर फ्रांसीसियों के कब्जे के बाद वियतनामियों की ज़िंदगी पूरी तरह बदल गई। जीवन के हर मोर्चे पर जनता का औपनिवेशिक शासकों के साथ टकराव होने लगा। फ्रांसीसियों का नियंत्रण सबसे ज़्यादा तो सैनिक और आर्थिक मामलों में ही दिखाई देता था, लेकिन वियतनामी संस्कृति को तहस नहस करने के लिए भी उन्होंने सुनियोजित प्रयास किए। फ्रांसीसियों और उनके वर्चस्व का एहसास कराने वाली हर चीज़ के खिलाफ वियतनामी समाज के हर तबके ने जमकर संघर्ष किया और यहीं से वियतनाम में राष्ट्रवाद के बीज पड़े। फ्रांसीसी सेना ने पहली बार 1858 में वियतनाम की धरती पर डेरा डाला। 80 के दशक के मध्य तक आते आते उन्होंने देश के उत्तरी इलाके पर मजबूती से कब्जा जमा लिया। फ्रांस चीन युद्ध के बाद उन्होंने टोंकिन और अनाम पर भी कब्जा कर लिया। 1887 में फ्रेंच इंडो चाइना का गठन किया गया। बाद के दशकों में एक और फ्रांसीसी शासक वियतनाम पर अपना कब्जा जमाते गए और दूसरी तरफ वियतनामियों को यह बात समझ में आने लगी कि फ्रांसीसियों के हाथों वे क्या क्या गंवा चुके हैं। इसी सोच विचार और जद्दोजहद से वियतनाम में राष्ट्रवादी प्रतिरोध विकसित। The first clear expression of nationalism came with the French Revolution in 1789. France, as you would remember, was a full-fledged territorial state in 1789 under the rule of an absolute monarch. The political and constitutional changes that came in the wake of the French Revolution led to the transfer of sovereignty from the monarchy to a body of French citizens. The revolution proclaimed that it was the people who would henceforth constitute the nation and shape its destiny. From the very beginning, the French revolutionaries introduced various measures and practices that could create a sense of collective identity amongst the French people. The idea of La Patria, the fatherland, and Les Citoyens, the citizen, emphasized the notion of a united community enjoying equal rights under a constitution. A new French flag, the tricolor, was chosen to replace the former royal standard. The States General was elected by the body of active citizens and renamed the National Assembly. New hymns were composed, oaths taken, and martyrs commemorated, all in the name of the nation. A centralized administrative system was put in place and it formulated uniform laws for all citizens within its territory. Internal custom duties and dues were abolished and a uniform system of weights and measures was adopted. Regional dialects were discouraged and French, as it was spoken and written in Paris, became the common language of the nation. The revolutionaries further declared that it was the mission and the destiny of the French nation to liberate the peoples of Europe from despotism, in other words, to help other peoples of Europe to become nations. When the news of the events in France reached the different cities of Europe, students and other members of educated middle classes began setting up Jacobin clubs. Their activities and campaigns prepared the way for the French armies, which moved into Holland, Belgium, Switzerland, and much of Italy in the 1790s. With the outbreak of the Revolutionary Wars, the French armies began to carry the idea of nationalism abroad. Decentralization in India. We noted above that federal governments have two or more tiers of governments. We have so far discussed the two tiers of government in our country. But a vast country like India cannot be run only through these two tiers. States in India are as large as independent countries of Europe. In terms of population, Uttar Pradesh is bigger than Russia. Maharashtra is about as big as Germany. Many of these states are internally very diverse. There is thus a need for power sharing within these states. Federal power sharing in India needs another tier of government, below that of the state governments. This is the rationale for decentralization of power. Thus resulted a third tier of a government, called local government. When power is taken away from central and state governments and given to local government, it is called decentralization. The basic idea behind decentralization is that there are a large number of problems and issues which are best settled at the local level. People have better knowledge of problems in their localities. They also have better ideas on where to spend money and how to manage things more efficiently. Besides, at the local level, it is possible for the people to directly participate in decision making. This helps to inculcate a habit of democratic participation. Local government is the best way to realize one important principle of democracy, namely local self-government. The need for decentralization was recognized in our constitution. Since then, there have been several attempts to decentralize power to the level of villages and towns. Panchayats in villages and municipalities in urban areas were set up in all the states, but these were directly under the control of state governments. Elections to these local governments were not held regularly. Local governments did not have any powers or resources of their own, thus there was very little decentralization in effective terms. A major step towards decentralization was taken in 1992. The constitution was amended to make the third tier of democracy more powerful and effective. Now it is constitutionally mandatory to hold regular elections to local government bodies. Seats are reserved in the elected bodies and the executive heads of these institutions for the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes. At least one-third of all positions are reserved for women. An independent institution called the State Election Commission has been created in each state to conduct panchayat and municipal elections. The state governments are required to share some powers and revenue with local government bodies. The nature of sharing varies from state to state. Rural local government is popularly known by the name Panchayati Raj. Each village or a group of villages in some states has a Gram Panchayat. This is a council consisting of several ward members, often called Panch, and a president or Sarpanch. They are directly elected by all the adult population living in that ward or village. It is the decision-making body for the entire village. The Panchayat works under the overall supervision of the Gram Sabha. All the voters in the village are its members. It has to meet at least twice or thrice in a year to approve the annual budget of the Gram Panchayat and to review the performance of the Gram Panchayat. The local government structure goes right up to the district level. A few Gram Panchayats are grouped together to form what is usually called a Panchayat Samiti or block or mandal. The members of this representative body are elected by all the Panchayat members in that area. All the Panchayat Samitis or mandals in a district together constitute the Zilla district Parishad. Most members of the Zilla Parishad are elected. Members of the Lok Sabha and MLAs of that district and some other officials of other district level bodies are also its members. Zilla Parishad chairperson is the political head of the Zilla Parishad. Similarly, local government bodies exist for the urban areas as well. Municipalities are set up in towns. Big cities are constituted into municipal corporations. Both municipalities and municipal corporations are controlled by elected bodies consisting of people's representatives. Municipal chairperson is the political head of the municipality in a municipal corporation. Such an officer is called the mayor. In the previous chapter, we noted that vertical division of power among different levels of governments is one of the major forms of power sharing in modern democracies. In this chapter, we focus on this form of power sharing. It is most commonly referred to as federalism. We begin by describing federalism in general terms. The rest of the chapter tries to understand the theory and practice of federalism in India. A discussion of the federal constitutional provisions is followed by an analysis of the policies and politics that has strengthened federalism in practice. Towards the end of the chapter, we turn to the local government, a new and third tier of Indian federalism. What is federalism? Let us get back to the contract between Belgium and Sri Lanka that we saw in the last chapter. You would recall that one of the key changes made in the constitution of Belgium was to reduce the power of the central government and to give these powers to the regional governments. Regional governments existed in Belgium even earlier. They had their roles and powers, but all these powers were given to these governments and could be withdrawn by the central government. The change that took place in 1993 was that the regional governments were given constitutional powers that were no longer dependent on the central government. Thus, Belgium shifted from a unitary to a federal form of government. Sri Lanka continues to be for all practical purposes a unitary system where the national government has all the powers. Tamil leaders want Sri Lanka to become a federal system. Federalism is a system of government in which the power is divided between a central authority and various constituent units of the country. Usually, a federation has two levels of government. One is the government for the entire country that is usually responsible for a few subjects of common national interest. The others are governments at the level of provinces or states that look after much of the day-to-day administering of their state. Both these levels of governments enjoy their power independent of the other. ग्रिम बंधुओं की कहानी, लोक कथाएं और राष्ट्र निर्माण। ग्रिम्स फेरी टेल्स एक जाना माना नाम है। जैकब ग्रिम और विल्हेल्म ग्रिम बंधुओं का जन्म क्रमशः 1785 और 1786 में जर्मनी के हनोई शहर में हुआ था। जिस समय ये दोनों भाई कानून की पढ़ाई कर रहे थे, उसी समय उन्होंने शौकिया तौर पर पुरानी लोक कथाएं इकट्ठा करना शुरू कर दिया। वे 6 साल तक गांव-गांव जाकर यही काम करते रहे। वे लोगों से बात करते थे और पीढ़ियों से चली आ रही जो भी लोक कथा उनकी जानकारी में आती उसे लिख कर रख लेते थे। ये कहानियाँ बच्चों और बड़ों में समान रूप से पसंद की जाती थी। 1812 में उन्होंने इन कहानियों का पहला संग्रह प्रकाशित किया। बाद में दोनों भाई उदारवादी राजनीति में सक्रिय हो गए। प्रेस की स्वतंत्रता के आंदोलन में उन्होंने विशेष रुचि ली। इसी बीच उन्होंने 33 खंडों में जर्मन भाषा का शब्दकोश भी प्रकाशित कर डाला। ग्रिम बंधु फ्रांस के वर्चस्व को जर्मन संस्कृति के लिए खतरा मानते थे। उनको विश्वास था कि उन्होंने जो लोक कथाएं इकट्ठी की है वे विशुद्ध और सच्ची जर्मन भावना की अभिव्यक्ति है। लोक कथाएं इकट्ठी करने और जर्मन भाषा को विकसित करने के अपने प्रयासों को वे फ्रांसीसी प्रभुत्व का विरोध करने और एक जर्मन राष्ट्र पहचान गढ़ने की व्यापक योजना का हिस्सा मानते थे। Prudential, based on prudence or on careful calculation of gains and losses, prudential decisions are usually contrasted with decisions based purely on moral considerations. Majoritarianism, a belief that the majority community should be able to rule a country in whichever way it wants, by disregarding the wishes and needs of the minority. Ethnic, a social division based on shared culture. People belonging to the same ethnic group believe in their common descent because of similarities of physical type or of culture or both. They need not always have the same religion or nationality.